Welcome to the Furman Auditorium. This building, as some of you may be aware, has a really wonderful innovation from the 20th century, particularly here in the auditorium, called air conditioning. And I'm not fooled by the fact that I know that that's really why you're here tonight, because of the air conditioning. So let's see if we can tell a few stories. We're going to start off talking about this house. This is 618 East Rutland Street. It's in the middle of the block, next door to Rod Rodriguez's office, if you know where Rod's office is, across from Todd and Norma Richard's house. And the oldest part of this building is made with mortise and tenon. That means that the wood was actually chiseled out and that the other wood went in like a slot. There were no nails used. And this is kind of interesting because nails became mass-produced and popular in the 1840s. So it gives us a little idea how far back this goes. Take particular note, it's got a front porch. It's got a kind of a slight slope to the roof, about a 612 pitch, and it has two chimneys. And the fact that it's got two chimneys is somewhat important because it's a sign of affluence. If you had a single chimney, it would be in the center of the home to keep the home warm. But someone who had two chimneys had a little bit of money with them. This is one of the fires that happened around the turn of the 20th century. And you can see that downtown Covington was devastated. That picture was taken from about Columbia Street, approximately in front of H.J. Smith's son. Looking through the Hike Park, looking through the Patachek building, all the way across downtown. And if you look to the far left, right over here, you can actually see a couple of workers standing on what would be Boston Street. And you can tell that they're public works employees because they're not moving.
Not true.
Absolutely not true. Thank you. City of Covington's public works employees are actually just doing a phenomenal job right now. They've got the city looking really, really good. But I also want to point out the house that's still standing to the back with the 612 pitch, the porch, and the two chimneys. That's the same house that's still on Rutland today. And if you were to go into that home, into the foyer, the business people there have a little table in the foyer, and they have wooden cedar shakes that are charred from the fire that are still there. That was the home of John Edis Smith. John was born in 1809, came to the U.S. in 1827, moved to New Orleans 1837. In 1843, he opened a store in Sun, which would actually have been about the center of the territory when the territory was the Ferdinand District, Washington and St. Tammany Parish put together. But in 1846, he moved his business to Covington onto Columbia Street. He bought the house at sheriff's sale in 1860, and in 1863, he was the highest ranking official in the city during the Civil War. That's important because the Union troops from New Orleans were getting aggravated with the guerrillas, the Confederate guerrillas in the area. They sent a gunboat over that landed in Madisonville, and they sent some troops from Madisonville marched up into Covington in July of 1863. They came up to Bogaflia Park and they found a couple of boys swimming in the river, and at that day and age you swam nude, so they put them on a donkey and kind of paraded them around town. It was a Frederick. We got any Fredericks here tonight? It was a Frederick, yes we do. Yes we do. And so the Union soldiers were thirsty, and a little girl, Susie, who lived in, Susie Smith, John's daughter, recalls in the 1930s, she tells the story of going into the house and pumping the hand well and bringing water out to the Union troops right there on Rutland Street. John Edis Smith comes to the Union troops and says, on the way back to Madisonville, you're going to get ambushed by the Confederate guerrillas. And they did. But none of them got shot. But two of them died on the return trip. They were from Vermont and New Hampshire. They had woolen uniforms in Louisiana in July of 1863. And they double-time marched and ran from Covington back to Madisonville, and they died of heat stroke. In the 1870s, Mr. Smith bought a newspaper for his daughter and gave it to her. Do we know what the newspaper was? Well, of course we do. It was the St. Tammany Farmer, still being published to this day. So Susie's husband was a editor, and he decided to open a print shop in 1883. And Susie and her husband had a son named William, who had a son named William, who had a son named William that we called Billy Kinsel. And today, Billy's children, Trey and Jamie, still run Kinsel Printing since 1883, run by the Kinsel family, which you think would be the oldest family-owned run business in Covington, but it's not. John Edis had 12 children, two of which one was Hardy and one was Henry James. We've got Hardy Smith here on the left, and we've got Henry James on the right. The two brothers took over the hardware store located on Columbia Street, and they did what brothers do when they're in business together. What's that? They had an argument. They had a disagreement. And Henry James said, well, forget you. I'm going to go open my own store. And so he moved down the street across Boston Street, and he opened H.J. Smith's Son in 1876, making that the longest family-owned business running in Covington. In this particular picture, we see H.J.'s son, Deed, standing along the counter with the bar behind. If you go to the store today, as you enter, if you'll go off to the right, you actually go into this museum, which is the original building from 1876. And you can see that wall and you can see that counter. I love this particular picture because of the juxtaposition of the exterior wall. That's the exterior wall, and then the interior wall. The original Smith on Columbia was destroyed by one of the fires. It was a True Value Hardware when I was a child growing up in the 1970s. So we had two Smith stores on Columbia Street as late as the 1970s. So H.J. Smith's Son, started in 1876, was the new Smith Hardware. And today, that building has been rebuilt in brick, repurposed, and we know it as Soufflé. And if you go into the Soufflé store and you look on the wall, you will see the brick, the original brick. It was originally a two-story building, and the second floor was destroyed in one of the fires. This is the home that Anna and Deed Smith lived in, and you can see some of the family members sitting on the bottom steps. This house is still in Covington today. Does anyone know where it is? Directly behind H.J. Smith's Son. If you go into the ox lot, behind there, you'll see this house right here. And that was Anna and Deed Smith's house. It's currently being renovated by Anna Smith, the great-great-great-granddaughter of Anna Smith. And it's being done by her husband, Reed. So this was the home done by Anna that belonged to Anna and Deed, and it's being renovated by Anna and Reed. So here we see a picture of Anna and Deed Smith, and we see them with their 3-year-old son, Joseph. Now, Mr. Smith was a cotton broker, and the farmers in Mississippi and North St. Tammany, Washington Parish, would bring their crops into Covington, and he would buy that from them and pay them in scrip that could only be spent at the store, which is kind of a smart business move. And he would hang on to the cotton until the price went up in New Orleans, and then he would ship it across the lake and sell it. One day he was down at the dock with his 3-year-old, and tragically his 3-year-old slipped off the dock into the river and drowned. And so Anna was devastated, and so she could no longer live in the house that was behind the store. So they built a new home right over there by St. Peter's Church on 19th Avenue called Rosanna. It had beautiful camellias and roses all around it, brick ranch home, and it had a basement, which she was from the Midwest, very unusual for a house in Louisiana to have a basement. Matter of fact, because it had a basement, that's why it's no longer here. The old house is still here, but not that one. So John Edis begot Hardy, and Hardy had Alfred V. Sr., who had Alfred V. Sr. Jr., who begot Alfred V. III, who we knew as Coach Allie Smith. Coach Allie Smith, who had 3 children, Brad, Scott, and Todd. And here they're pictured at the 50th anniversary of the Smith, well, it wasn't True Value then, but the Smith store on Columbia Street. And we have Hardy right here, Hardy Jr. that became a physician. This would be Archie Sr. with his wife Corinne. And this would be Alfred V. Smith, probably Allie's grandfather, if I had to get it correct. if I were guessing, right there. And since this was the 50th anniversary and the store started in 1846, this picture would have been taken around 1906, how long they had been in business. Archie Sr. and Corinne had a son and a daughter. Archie Jr. was the son, and he had Archie III. And the daughter Corinne married Stan Marcellan, who actually became a mayor of Covington, and they had a daughter named Sue. And that would be Archie Smith III, who worked at Poole Lumber Company for so many years. And that would be Susan Marcellan Meyer, who's sitting right over there. Where are you, Susan? There she is. Just wave up, stick your hand up. Hi there. And then he had another son named H.J., the one who opened H.J. And by the way, it's not H.J. Smith and Sons. It's H.J. Smith's son is the name of the store. And H.J. had a son named John Lewis Smith Sr., who we call Deed. And the reason he was called Deed is because he owned so many pieces of property, he had so many deeds. And he had a son named John L. Smith Jr., which is Red. And the reason he was called Red was because he was red. And he actually grew up in Rosiana. And here's a family photo, and we can see Red Smith right here. This is John L. Smith III, who we know as Jack. We've got Larry. We've got Henry, which is also known Henry James, which is known as Jim, which is known as Smoke. We've got Eugene, and we've got Kevin. So there's 5 boys. So if you ever wondered why you couldn't keep up with which one was which, it's because there's 5 boys, but they have 8 names. This is his sister Cheryl. Cheryl was tragically killed in a train accident when she was going to Southeastern in Hammond. And this is Wanda. And Wanda graduated from St. Scholastica in 1976. And this is Rita, the mom, and Rita Heinz. We've got a couple of Heinzes here tonight, I believe. And Rita had a sister named Winnie, who had a daughter named Geraldine, who graduated from St. Scholastica in 1976. Rita had another sibling, a brother named Ludwig, they call him LT. And he had a daughter named Susan Heinz, married Mark Blanchard, Susan Blanchard, and she graduated from St. Scholastica in 1976. So Wanda and her 2 first cousins all graduated from SSA in 1976. Now, just around 1898, the train came to Covington, and folks started arriving by train. This is a great picture of Gibson Street. That's the train in the middle of the street. The Covington restaurant off to the right is not Martina Bella. It's not Nathan's. I believe that's the vacant lot directly behind the Star Theater. The 2-story, I believe, is where Martina Bella or Nathan's was located. And you can see how the train track curves off to the left. That would be Brook Bicycle Shop right in that area. And this little bit of framing that we see in the bottom left-hand corner, that would have been the train depot. The train depot on New Hampshire Street, where we're doing Histories and Mysteries, is the new train depot, which was built more or less in the 1920s. And we had, if you were moving here and you came by train, your furniture would actually come by boat, Columbia Street Landing. And here we've got a wonderful picture of the landing with some of the boats there. It was a commercial dock, kind of a dangerous place, a lot of work going on. And if we look up at the top of the hill, we see the Masonic Temple, which is located right where the brick one is today. And I think, Mr. Blossman, you said it burned in 23? Yeah. The fire of 1923. It's 100 years old this year. Yeah. I did that in my head. So in 1915, we had 3 children and their family who moved here, and that would be Louis, Alva, and Elma Ross. And they came by train, but their furniture came by boat. And each morning, the children would go down to the Columbia Street Landing to see if the boat had come in with their furniture. And lo and behold, one day they went down there and the furniture had come in. They went and told Daddy, and Dad went to the livery stable, the Wallace Pool livery stable. And you can picture little Weldon Poole, who was probably about 5 years old at the time. I keep seeing him up in the loft throwing hay down on Lewis and Alvin. He got the wagon, he loaded it up, and he moved the furniture into this house on the corner of 23rd Avenue and Tyler. The family lived there continuously. Lewis married Helen Shop. Alvin married her sister Althea. I don't know that we had a whole lot of choices at that time. It was a small town, and and here we have from the 1930s a very rare Google image of the area. And you can see right here, this is the corner of 23rd and Tyler, and this is the house that they lived in. And Mr. Louis lived there until he got married, and then he moved all the way across the alley to this house right here. And he lived there until 1995, until he passed away. And his brother Alvin, who was much, much more adventurous, moved all the way over here to this house right there. And his son Louis Jr. moved across the street and lived right there, and they still live there today. Live right next door to the Drinkards, right here. Everett and Claire Cooper had a brother named Ernest. He was mayor for about 22 years. Had 8 children. Jed, Mark, Janice, Ellen, Cheryl, Kathy, Karen. So if you had all those Drinkards, and we already know we got a gaggle of Smiths running around, what were the odds that a Drinkard was going to marry a Smith? Allie Smith. So we see here that Mr. Louis lived here until 1995. And on a personal note, this is Mr. Louis's house right here. My wife Karen and I live right here, right there, on what would have been the side yard of his house. Our house was built by Ron Lee, whose daughter Jennifer married Peyton Eustace, whose mother Lisby Morse Eustace graduated. Well, she's right back there. Graduated from SSA in 1976. And then here's the Alvin Ross home on the corner of 23rd and Harrison. And they lived there from 1932 until 2005 when Karen and I bought the house. And we were only the second family to ever live in this particular home. Matter of fact, Karen and I lived at 23rd and Harrison. We moved from there to 20th and Harrison, which you can't see right down here. Today we live at 22nd and Harrison. And when I was a child, I lived on 14th and Harrison. We like Harrison. And here's a picture of the St. Paul's Mothers Club, 1946. And we've got the picture, here's Althea right here. Here she is. And that's Miss Helen right there. Oh, if you look over here, this is that's Henrietta Kinsel. So that would be, I believe that would be Billy's mother. And that would be Trey and Jamie's grandmother right there. This one next to her, that's Madeline Champagne. She was married to Tom Champagne. He served as mayor after Stan Marcelin. And she had a great-granddaughter named Steph Hendry McDaniel, who owns Souffle. And she had a granddaughter named Tammy Smith, Tammy Hendry Smith, who married Jack Smith, whose great-great-great-grandfather had the store where Steph, his niece, has today. And Tammy graduated from SSA in 1976. Right over here we've got, this is Madeline Champagne. I'm sorry, Madeline Frederick. This is Madeline Champagne. Gladys Frederick. This is Gladys Frederick. She was married to Hebert Frederick. He was developed a subdivision that some of us might be familiar with, Old Landing. he developed Old Landing. And the reason they call it Old Landing, remember that the cargo dock at Columbia Street was kind of messy. So there was another landing further downstream where when the passengers would arrive, they would actually get off at that landing, and then they would get into a carriage and come down Yankee Avenue in a carriage. Yankee Avenue was originally called Louisiana Avenue, but when the Yankees, who had the shipyard, dredged the clamshells out of the lake and paved the entire road, they changed the name to Yankee. And the Fredericks, Hebert and Gladys, lived at the corner of 19th and Yankee in the same home Councilman Verrett, same home that Councilman Verrett lives in today. And they had a horse in the backyard. And when two horses, I was corrected. And well, you had to have two horses because when Hebert Jr. was a courting, he had a girl come over and they'd ride the horses all around town and all the way up to Avita. And he eventually married that girl. That's her mother-in-law right there. And that's Miss Dorothy right there. Hi, Miss Dorothy. That's your mother-in-law. And Miss Dorothy now lives on the property where the landing was located. And then Emil had a great-great-grandchildren that we know today as the attorney Renee Frederick and his sister Jamie Frederick. Jamie Frederick McWilliams. No, neither one. No, he didn't graduate from SSA in 1970. This is Ruth Salter. Now, Miss Ruth had a son named R.N., Roger Noble, and another son named Jack. Jack coached a little football. Has a stadium named after him. Coach Jack Salter Stadium. And Miss Ruth had a granddaughter named Barbara who graduated from SSA in 1976. Right here we've got Miss Edith Shane, as in Shane Funeral Home, and she married Edward Fielding, as in Fielding Funeral Home. And right here we've got Miss Catherine Pacey. She had a daughter named Kay Pacey. Kay, Catherine's daughter Kay, married Edith's son Edward. And they had 3 children. Eddie Fielding III, who's the director, Kathy Fielding Smith, and Pam Fielding Vocal, who had a son she named Pacey on the maiden side name. So her great-grandson is her great-grandson, and he married Jamie Frederick. So we've got a great-grandson here that married the great-granddaughter of her sister-in-law. I think I got that right. And then this would be Eunice Lassane. Eunice had Mr. Lassane, the lifeguard. So Eunice has a grandson named Renee. I call him Hoot, and he married Cindy Busby. Cindy had his stepfather was Roy Cooper, who was Claire Cooper's brother and Ernest Cooper's brother. Ernest was mayor for 22 years. Ernest had a son named Mike, who was mayor of Covington for 8 years, and he's currently the parish president. Mike's chief administrative officer is Gina Hayes. She used to be my CAO, now he's his CAO. She used to live a block down the street on the left on the corner of Van Buren and 23rd at 227, Oh, okay, Monroe, thank you. 227 West 23rd, I should have stuck to the address. It's the same house that Jack Blossman and Dick Blossman and Fred Blossman grew up in. And Fred Blossman married Royanne Hurd. And Royanne Hurd has a sister named Gail. And Gail married Buster Swords. And that's Buster's mama right there, Alice. And Buster and Gail had a daughter named Stephanie, and she graduated from SSA in 1976. The Causeway Bridge opened in 1955. And the St. Paul's Ladies Club knew that it was important that that bridge be built. They knew that it was vital for the North Shore. they knew it was imperative that we expand the gene pool in Covington. And here we've got a lovely picture of some of the Rosses, continuing their family tree. Alvin Sr. in the middle, and then Alvin Jr., Evan sitting in his dad's lap, Alvin III. Alvin III, you back there? Hey, Alvin. Alvin and Sr. and Althea had a daughter, Betsy. She had 3 children, Lauren, Carol, and they had a son, the ubiquitous Bobby Gilboy. He's everywhere. Is he here tonight? Hey, Bobby. And Big Louie, organized Citizens Bank. And he did that with Archie Smith, Weldon Poole, Teddy Kensel, Tom Champagne, Alfred Alexius. He worked at St. Tammany Homestead in the 1920s, which eventually moved into the John Smith House that we talked about earlier. Helped with the organization of St. Peter's Church in 1940, Crew of Olympia in 1965, and he founded Citizens Bank and Trust in 1945. And then here's Miss Helen years later, his wife, and she's here with Kay Brandt, with Paige, with Mary Mizell, Meg, and little David. They fed little David. They call him Tank. Never could figure out why. And then another more recent picture with Kay Brandt, Laura, Tina, Mary, Meg, and Paige, and do I have those in the, yeah, okay, yeah, Joanna, Laura. And today, Laura Brandt is the president of Citizens Bank, the one that her grandfather founded. The sister Elma that moved over with him in 1915, she never married, and she continued to live in this house until her eyesight got so poor that she could no longer live by herself. So she moved clear down the street to her brother's house and lived there until they both passed. That's a bookmobile. Anybody here remember the bookmobile? Okay, we're showing our age. That was the new St. Tammany Parish bookmobile that we acquired in 1959. And this is the bookmobile lady, Miss Dorothy Williams. And she drove the bookmobile from 1959 to 1985. Before that, she taught at Rosenwall, and she was a childhood friend of Miss Winnie. This is one of my favorite all-time photos. This is her inside the branch library. It was located at, let's see if I can get this one right, 28th and Tyler. There's a little brown house there right across the street from the Rosenwall School and Harris Curriculum Center. And this was during the time of segregation, so this would have been the blacks-only library. And up, we got a new bookmobile. That's the one, I actually remember that one. They're fueling it up at Holden's.
Oh, yes.
See over here, it's Holden's. Can you see this little sign right here? S&H Green Stamps. S&H Green Stamps. I always wondered when they filled up the bookmobile, who got the green stamps? Her husband, Herman, was a carpenter, played semi-pro baseball for the local team. They had one son, but he was too small to play football. So he did 2 things. One is he joined the band, and the other thing he did was he ate and he ate and he ate until he got big enough that his mother let him play football. And young Mike gained weight, and he went on to play for Covington High School for Coach Jack Salter. He played both defensive back and running back, and though he played both sides of the ball throughout the season, he was still able to finish rushing yards #3 in the state. He signed to attend Southeastern University, but a doctor and an educator had another idea. Dr. Jake Ketty and Superintendent Sip Shane got him in a car, drove him up to Baton Rouge, and introduced him to Charlie Mack. And Mike became the first black person to ever play football for LSU. He broke the racial barrier, the Jackie Robinson of LSU football. He was an All-American, first-round draft pick for the San Diego Chargers, 8 years in the NFL, 24 interceptions, and he says, "Mark, I'd have had more, but they wouldn't throw my way." He told me some other stories too, but I'm not supposed to share those. And Mike continues to live in the West 30s, and currently his son Kylan, his grandson Kylan, plays for Covington High. So Mike played for Coach Jack Salter, and Coach Jack's grandson Greg is now the coach. So Coach Jack Salter's grandson is coaching Mike Williams. Folks, we got to stop. We'd be going on all night. That's it. So thank y'all for coming out. I hope you enjoyed it.